So we know the Bhagavad Gita is so profound, so deep on so many levels. And in today's webinar, we're going to have Dr. Sriram Sarvatam explore some of the unique contributions that the Bhagavad Gita synthesizes of Nivritti Marga, the path of contemplation, and Pravritti Marga, the path of dynamic activity, specifically through yoga. So some of the framing questions are, can deep meditation and dynamic activity coexist in the same person? Or are some people meditative by nature, while others are driven to action? Are we constrained by our own past karma to move in one direction or the other? Sometimes I feel like that way, right? The universe is taking us this way. Or can they be integrated? So in this webinar, we will introduce you, the attendees, to a structured journey of exploration of the world of yoga enunciated in the Bhagavad Gita And we'll also compare Krishnaji's, Sri Krishna, Lord Krishna, Bhagwan, I don't like Lord, right? Bhagwan Krishnaji's exposition with the teachings of Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. And our guest, our expert, is our faculty member today is Dr. Sriram Sarvatam. And I'm going to give him an introduction. I have more people in the chat saying hello. I think Srinivas ji from India, Geeta ji from Houston, Texas, Bharti from Phoenix, Niru from Austin, Pranam, Jaya ji, namaste everyone, Padma ji from Missouri City in Texas. Glad to have you all on. Now let me introduce our faculty, our panelists, our speaker, Dr. Sriram Sarvatam, who is a certified yoga practitioner. He's got his ERYT 500. He's been practicing since childhood. He initially, I think he was initiated into yoga by Yogacharya Subramanian from Chennai, India. He studied under him for 14 years. Sriramji has been teaching yoga since 1991 in India. He's taught over 300 yoga workshops and retreats all over the US. He's been teaching courses at Hindu University of America for several quarters now, and his workshops offer a holistic experience of yoga. They blend wisdom from classic yoga texts, including the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, of course, the Bhagavad Gita, and so many more. And I think we may have some of his previous students in the audience where he helps students discover the core principles of yoga contained in the classic text and then apply them to their daily lives. So it is my pleasure to hand it off to Dr. Sriram Sarvatam, who's going to be talking on several different issues, but honing in on the Bhagavad Gita as a yoga shastra. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Sriramji, let me hand it off to you.
Dhanyawadaha. Thank you so much, Ankurji, and thank you all for joining today's program, where we will embark on a journey into Bhagavad Gita as a yoga shastra. I also would like to acknowledge the presence of my teacher here in this webinar, from whom I learned the in-depth study of the Bhagavad Gita, Dr. Venkata Raju. Thank you so much, Dr. Raju, for joining us today. Let me begin with a Dhyana Shloka on Bhagavad Gita. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavati Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshini. Thank you everyone once again for joining today's webinar, where we are going to explore Bhagavad Gita as a yoga shastra. So those of us who are familiar with the chanting of the Bhagavad Gita towards the end of each chapter, we say, Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gitasu Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre. So Bhagavad Gita captures the essence of the Upanishads. It's a Brahma Vidya, and it is also a Yoga Shastra. It is a scriptural text that gives the foundations of the wisdom of yoga and the practices of yoga. And we will explore some of these different facets in today's webinar. Perhaps a good place to start is to look at the very first word of the Bhagavad Gita and also the very last word. What is the last word of the text? So when we look at the first word of the Bhagavad Gita, Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre Samaveta Yuyutsavaha Mamakaha Pandavaschaiva Kim Akurvata Sanjaya. So Dharma is the first word. Dharma. Dharma has different meanings, but in today's presentation, we will use the meaning of Dharma as the intrinsic quality or the intrinsic characteristic of something. What is the intrinsic nature of something? And in particular, what is the intrinsic nature of the self? Self-realization, how to discover who I am. So Dharma as an intrinsic nature, and Swadharma, what are the qualities of the self, the attributes of the self. And the last word of the Bhagavad Gita is Mama, mine. Sanjaya says, Yatra Yogeshwara Krishno, Yatra Partho Dhanurdharaha, Tatra Shrir Vijayo Bhutihi, Dhruva Nitihi, Matihi, Mama. That's the last verse of the Bhagavad Gita, in the 18th chapter. And the last word is Matihi, Mama, my. So when we look at the first and the last word of the Bhagavad Gita, my dharma, Mama dharma, exploration of the nature of the self. So when we look at the Yoga Shastras, we see that they have an underlying theme. Most of the Yoga Shastras deal with introspective practices, Nivritti Marga, so going inwards. So from the mind that is hankering for the outside experiences, extroverted mind, we try to retrieve it back and discover the nature of the self. But in the Bhagavad Gita, we see an amazing perspective that is presented by Sri Krishna, where he beautifully synthesizes the introspective practices along with dynamic activity. So it is a combination of Nivritti Marga, introspection, as well as Pravritti Marga, where we combine that with dynamic activity. In fact, what we discover is not only are they contradictory, it's not presented as a contradiction. In fact, they complement each other. If we want to excel in our action, then the more rooted we are in the self, then we can excel and be dynamic in our activity. So how does this happen? And it is presented beautifully in the Bhagavad Gita. Perhaps we can examine the last verse again, which is described by the scholars of the Bhagavad Gita as the Eka Shloki, which is the single shloka, single verse in the Bhagavad Gita that captures the essence of the entire text. So the one single summary verse that captures the essence of the entire text. So let me repeat the verse again. This is spoken by Sanjaya. Sanjaya uvacha yatra yogeshwara krishnaha yatra partho dhanurdharaha tatra shrir vijayo bhutihi dhruvani tirmatir mama. So Sanjaya says, yatra yogeshwara krishnaha, wherever there is Krishna. And here we see the adjective Yogeshwara, the Lord of Yoga, the Lord of Yoga, Yogeshwara Krishna. And yatra partho dhanurdaraha, wherever there is Arjuna, Partha, who is ready for action. Dhanurdaraha means with the bow in his hand, ready for action. So wherever there is Krishna and wherever there is dynamic actor who is embodied in the form of Arjuna with bow ready in his hand, there in that place, there is Shrihi, Vijayaha, Bhutihi, Dhruvanitihi, Matihi Mama. Matihi Mama. This is my opinion, Sanjaya says, and he says, in that place, there is victory, there is prosperity, there is orderliness. And of this, I am convinced. So with that conviction, he says, whenever there is Krishna and Arjuna, in that place, there is all good things. There is harmony there, prosperity, victory there. So what does it mean? So Yogeshwara Krishna, when we examine what is this divine principle, he says in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishtaha. Krishna says, I reside in the heart of all beings. So whenever we are in touch with that spark of divinity within, so Krishna resides in the heart of all beings, whenever we are in touch with that principle. And whenever we are ready for action, that is exemplified by Arjuna, Parthaha, Dhanurdaraha. So whenever these two coexist, who is ready to express the divinity from within and share the divinity with the world. So in that place, there is prosperity, there is victory there is orderliness, etc. So there are two aspects to it. One is how to get in touch with that place of divinity. Because many times we get caught up in the demands of the day-to-day life that we feel uprooted. We are not rooted in the self. We forget ourselves and we get caught up in the turbulence of the outside world. Whenever a tree is uprooted, then it doesn't thrive. It withers away. So whenever we feel exhausted, perhaps we are not in touch with the spark of divinity that resides within. Most of us would like to be loving, kind. We have all these values that we want to express in life. We want to be peaceful. We want to be joyful. We want to be kind to others. We want to serve others. So it is an innate desire that resides in the self. It is the nature of the self to exuberantly express these qualities. But many times what happens is when we are not in touch with these values, what happens is that we demonstrate the opposite through our actions. Perhaps we easily get angry or we get provoked and we utter words that we regret later. So whenever we are not in touch with that inner divinity, our actions demonstrate the opposite of our core intentions. You see? So the point is, when we are in touch with the divinity and when our actions are in harmony with that divine principle, then our actions will always be uplifting to oneself and to others. So when we look at the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, what we discover is, first, Krishna gives the knowledge about the self, the nature of the self. In Sankhya Yoga, the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, in Sankhya Yoga, Lord Krishna presents the nature of the self. What is the dharma? What is the inherent attributes of the self? This is a foundational tenets of yoga philosophy. For example, when we read the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali assumes that the reader is familiar with the basic tenets of Sankhya. he uses words, technical words from Sankhya, and he assumes that the reader of the Yoga Sutras are already familiar with those terms. For example, Prakriti, Purusha, and the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, etc. Pratyaya, and all these technical words that he uses, Patanjali assumes that the reader is already familiar with it. So one way to deepen our study of Sankhya is through the Bhagavad Gita. It underlays the foundations of yoga. And in the Sankhya Yoga chapter, Sri Krishna presents the nature of the self, and also the nature of the world, nature of the physical world, and talks about the 24 tattvas. For example, one of the verses in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it says, Mahabhutani ahankaraha buddhihi avyaktamevacha indriyani dashaikamcha panchachendriya gocharaha. So all the 24 tattvas that comprise of the world is presented. And Krishna also says that the inquiry into the nature of the self, inquiry into who I am, is just one half of the equation. And in the second half of the equation, we should also find out, what am I to do? How should I act in this world? What is the nature of this physical universe? And what should I do now? How should I engage with the world? So the answer actually lies in the very first verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Dharma kshetre kurukshetre. When we rearrange the words, we see kshetre kshetre dharmam kuru. Kshetre kshetre dharmam kuru. Wherever you are, in whichever place you are, in whichever body do you reside, perform dharma. Do actions that are in alignment with the intentions of the self. Do righteous action, virtuous actions, and so forth. So in order to first discover who we are, not just as a conceptual understanding, perhaps when we read the scriptures, we discover, okay, the self is eternal. The body is born and dies, but the self is eternal. Najayate mriyate va kadachit. We read that in the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. But converting this conceptual understanding into an experiential lived reality. How can I get in touch with the self as an experience? That is described in the Bhagavad Gita in the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is titled Dhyana Yoga, or also called Atma Samyama Yoga. There, Sri Krishna gives us systematic methods, systematic ways in which we can quiet the turbulent mind. He gives us a recipe of how to quiet the mind. In fact, it is said that the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is a complete manual for meditation. It is a comprehensive manual for meditation. It describes how to sit for meditation, how to balance the prana for meditation, where should the focus of awareness be, what to do when the mind is wandering. Yato yato nischarati manas chanchalam astiram, he says. What to do when the mind wanders away, drifts away from the self. It goes outside because of its habit. Patanjali calls it the vyuthana samskara, the habit of the mind to be extroverted and seek happiness outside. So what to do in such situations? And even before we sit in the yoga mat, how do we organize our life so that the quality of our meditation is enhanced? How should we eat? How should we sleep? Moderation in activity, moderation in sleep, moderation in our recreation, rest, etc. Yuktahara viharasya, yukta cheshtasya karmasu, yukta swapnavabodhasya, yogo bhavati dukkhaha. Being skillful in all these aspects when we engage with the world, doing things in moderation. So all these practices give the foundations It prepares our meditation practice. So when we sit for meditation, we allow the mind to more easily settle down and be in a quiet place. Allow the mind to go from a place of turbulence to a place of tranquility. So he describes every step along the way, how to realize the self, how to experience the self. In fact, after this teaching is presented towards the end of the 6th chapter, Arjuna asks a question. He says, okay, it is all very good to hear, to quiet the mind. It sounds very easy, but guess what, Krishna? My mind is very turbulent. It is as turbulent as the wind. My teacher used to call it the category 6 hurricane. It is so fierce, it is so unruly that I don't think I can quiet the mind. Maybe meditation works for some other people, but not my mind. That's what Arjuna says. It is not for me. Meditation is not for me. And then Sri Krishna says, no, it's the nature of the mind to be like that. Asamshayam mahabaho manodurnigraham chalam. Asamshayam, no doubt, the nature of the mind is to be restless. It is the nature of the mind to be turbulent. But you know what? Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate. By using abhyasa, practices, and vairagya, which is centeredness or dispassion, using these two, you can think of these two as the wings of the yoga sadhana, abhyasa and vairagya, these two wings of the yoga sadhana. And using these two wings, we can soar into the path of yoga. And the mind will easily settle down with abhyasa and vairagya. And thousands of years later, Patanjali echoes the same teachings in his Yoga Sutra. He says, Abhyasa Vairagyabhyam Tannirodha. Using Abhyasa, practice, and Vairagya, dispassion or centeredness, that Nirodha, the quieting of the mind, quieting of the chitta vrittis take place. And you can abide in the self. Tadadrashtuhu swarupe avasthanam, Patanjali says. You can abide in the nature of the self. You can experience the joy that wells up in the self. In fact, the only place where we can truly experience joy is within. So when we reside, when the chitta, when the mind resides with the self, then we are able to connect with the source of happiness, yoga sukham, as it is called, yoga sukham, the joy that wells up from within. So this is how we connect with the self. This is the nivritti marga, introspection, and allowing ourselves to be in touch with that place of Yogeshwara Krishna. Remember, it is the spark of divinity that resides within. We are in touch with that place. So this is the experience of the self. The second part is the expression of the self. So not only the experience, but we need to give expression to it. We need to use our actions as a way to express joy rather than use actions as a way to expect joy. One of my teachers, Sri Ravi Shankarji, he says it very beautifully. He says, use actions for expressing joy rather than expecting joy. So when we have found the joy within by abiding in the self, then give expression to it. Use our actions as a means to share the joy with the outside world. In Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna uses the word loka sangraham, using our actions to help spread harmony in the world. And this is at the heart of karma yoga. And the yoga of action or yoga of karma yoga, Bhagavad Gita holds a very unique place because most of the yoga texts talk about yoga in the form of an introspective practice, quieting the mind, meditation, etc. But Bhagavad Gita has a very unique place because it also talks about how we can live yoga in our day-to-day activities as well. And in fact, both of them complement each other. The deeper we go in meditation, the more quiet the mind is, the more we are able to excel in our action. In fact, one of the definition of yoga that we see in the Bhagavad Gita is yoga karmasu kaushalam. Karmasu kaushalam, skill in action or excellence in action is yoga. And in fact, many of the famous verses of the Bhagavad Gita are in the topic of karma and karma yoga. And yoga karmasu kaushalam, excellence in action is yoga. Here he gives an abhyasa, a practice. Whatever we are asked to do, whatever is our responsibility, come from a place of how can I do the best of what I am asked to do. Karmasu kaushalam, we can turn it into an abhyasa. How can I excel in this? How can I do the best job in this? So it becomes a very playful, or it becomes a sadhana, rather than thinking of our obligations or our duties and responsibilities as a challenge or as something to be afraid of or to be anxious about. Instead of that, we turn it around and say, how can I excel in it? How can I do the best in it? And this becomes an abhyasa. And what we discover is the happiness that comes intrinsically as we excel in it, as we give our best. It is that joy is unmatched. That joy is of a higher quality than the joy that comes from the fruits of the action. The fruits of the action, you can think of them as the fringe benefits. They come as a consequence of doing the action, yes, but there is a far greater joy, the intrinsic joy that comes from excelling in that action, that is of a higher quality. And he integrates, Sri Krishna integrates the two in this very beautiful verse. He says, Yogastha kuru karmani. Yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. Another definition of yoga he gives. In fact, in the Bhagavad Gita, we see several definitions of the word yoga. And here samatvam, equanimous state of the mind, equilibrium of the mind is yoga. And he begins this verse by saying, Yogastha kuru karmani. That means be established in yoga first and then do your actions. Do not reverse the order. You see? Because whenever we perform actions with a disturbed mind, then usually we don't excel in our actions. Or perhaps we make mistakes. There are errors that we make, mistakes we make, and then all the mistakes have to be cleaned up. There are a lot of bugs that will be introduced that have to be debugged. But when we come from a place of yoga, when we are abiding in the self, in fact, abiding in the self is called swastha. Swastha. Swasmin sthite, or as Patanjali says, swarupe avasthanam. Swarupe avasthanam. When we abide in the self, the word swastha literally means health, good health, exuberant health comes from a place of abiding in the self. And from that place, when we're abiding in the self, when we perform our actions, those actions will be of a higher quality. They have the quality of excellence. They will not be mediocre actions, but they will be excellent actions. Whenever we want to excel in something, be in yoga first. Allow the mind to be tranquil so that the mind is able to abide in the self. And from that place, when we perform action, then we are able to do an excellent job. Yogastha kuru karmani. So this is another practice. Before we do any action, take a few moments to allow the mind to settle down and then decide to do something. Or whenever we want to do any action, like before eating or before driving or before doing an important task at work, whatever task it is, allowing the mind to be in a quiet place, it will make the mind choose the correct decisions, that is uplifting. For example, when the mind is quiet and then when we consume food, we are able to make good food choices. We are guided towards eating nutritious food. And we are able to listen to the body. When the body says, enough, I've had enough food, we don't miss that communication from the body's intelligence. Because the mind is quiet, we are able to listen to the body. But when the mind is disturbed, or when the mind is elsewhere, maybe watching TV or maybe gossiping, then we miss the signals that come from within. So whenever we are in a place of yogastha, when the mind is quiet, in samatvam, when the mind is not agitated, but when the mind is quiet, we are able to make the right decisions. That is uplifting to oneself and to others. So this is Karma Yoga, the heart of Karma Yoga. And during the workshop, Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, we will explore several different sadhanas in Karma Yoga that is presented by Sri Krishna. Let me mention just one more sadhana that is mentioned as part of Karma Yoga. This appears in the 4th chapter. And this sadhana, this practice is called Karmani Akarma Darshanam. And there is also a complementary abhyasa, which is Akarmani Karma Darshanam. What does it mean? Karmani Akarma Darshanam means when we are engaged in some activity, also be in touch with that place which is stable, which is not active. In other words, it is centered. It is not moving. It is not restless. Be anchored in that place as you are engaged in dynamic activity. So in the 4th chapter, Sri Krishna says, Karmanya karmaya pashyet, akarmani cha karmayaha, sabuddhiman manushyeshu, sayukta kritsna karma krita. Karmani akarmaya pashyet. That means when we are engaged in activity, we are also in touch with that place which is stable. Allow yourself to be in that place. Then it will enhance the quality of your action. So let us examine this with an example. Consider a washing machine. So when the washing machine is spinning very fast, if the washing machine is not stably anchored to the ground, what happens is it keeps wobbling, it keeps moving around, and you are hoping that it doesn't spin very fast. Hopefully it doesn't spin very fast, otherwise it'll wobble all around the place. It creates a big mess. So the point is, in order for the washing machine or a wheel, you can think of a wheel, if you want it to spin very fast, then you want the hub of the wheel to be anchored in a stable place. When we are anchored to the self, which is stable, we are able to perform dynamic action. And here we see the beautiful synthesis of combining inner peace with dynamic activity. Again, Sri Ravi Shankar ji, one of my teachers, he calls it IPOD, IPOD. The acronym stands for inwardly peaceful and outwardly dynamic. Inner peace and outer dynamism. Many times we experience the opposite. Inwardly, there is a lot of agitated states, maybe anxiety or turbulence in the mind, and outwardly, the body is paralyzed, as they say, analysis paralysis, right? Sometimes when we are not in a yogic state, the mind is disturbed, a lot of turbulence in the mind, and we are not doing anything. We're just stuck, analysis paralysis. So a yogi turns it around. So there is peace within. We are anchored to the peaceful place within, yet our actions are dynamic. Sometimes we feel that if a person is meditating, maybe they will not be intense in their actions. I remember one of my friends, she shared with me a very interesting story about when she was applying for jobs. In her resume, she had stated that she is a meditation teacher. She's a meditation teacher. And the recruiter for the job, he said, "Oh, please remove that line, because if people know that you practice meditation, they might think that you'll be lethargic at work, that you might not do a good job, you'll be lazy." And what a very topsy-turvy way to understand meditation, right? Because here, what we discover by studying Bhagavad Gita is, the more dynamic we want to be in action, the more stable we want to be rooted with the self. And that is what meditation gives. In fact, meditation assists dynamic activity. It creates the space for dynamic activity to happen. And here, Sri Krishna beautifully gives the example of how you can combine them with this practice, karmani akarma darshanam. When we are engaged in dynamic activity, we can enhance the quality of it by being rooted in the self. There's also a very beautiful verse from the third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called Karma Yoga, the yoga of action. He says, Satta karmanya vidvamsaha yatha kurvanti bharata kuryat vidvams tatha saktaha chikirshurloka sangraham. He says, Yatha karmanya vidvamsaha. Just like how a person with a disturbed mind who's craving for happiness outside, the frenzy with which they do action to go after material things which they think will bring happiness. So with that intensity with which they act in the material world, a person of a stable mind acts with the same intensity, but for loka sangraham, for the sake of bringing harmony, to share joy with the world. So a person who is stable within will not be lethargic, will not be lazy. In fact, they will be engaged in the same intensity of action, but the action is now towards sharing of happiness, sharing of harmony, rather than craving for harmony and hankering from outside. So this is the power of combining meditation and dynamic activity. They complement each other. And before I conclude, I also would like to point out that one of the key ingredients of any yoga sadhana is bhakti. Bhakti. Because without the element of devotion, all these practices can become very mechanical. Okay, sit in the yoga mat, do some asanas, and do some pranayamas, open and close the nostrils. It becomes a very mechanical practice. It is the bhakti which empowers, it brings the passion. And here again, we see how vairagya and bhakti, they complement each other. Vairagya is detachment or dispassion. Yet we want to be enthusiastic, passionate, or intense in our practice. And it is the bhakti which gives the energy. Bhakti is like the engine that empowers our action. In fact, the word puja, usually we associate the word puja with worship. The word puja literally means purnat jayate iti puja. Purnat jayate. Purna means full. With the heart full of devotion, whatever inspired action that comes from within, that is born from the heart, jayate means to be born. So purnat jayate, that inspired thought, the inspired action that is born from a place of fullness in the heart full of devotion, that action is called puja. Purnat jayate. So all our actions are inspired from bhakti. And indeed, even in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, what we discover is, in the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali talks about 3 different streams of abhyasas. One of them is a samadhi, yoga, which he describes in the first chapter. And then he talks about Kriya Yoga, yoga of action, and then Ashtanga Yoga, the familiar 8 limbs of yoga. And it is Ishvara Pranidhana, the devotion to Ishvara, which is the single common abhyasa that is presented in all the 3 streams. You see, whatever path in yoga we take, the key ingredient in all of that is bhakti inspired action and bhakti inspired practices in when we sit inside the yoga mat and so forth. So Arjuna was not just ready for action, but he was also a devotee. His heart was filled with bhakti. And wherever there is bhakti, there is great progress that can be made, great strides we make in the path of yoga. So all these aspects we will explore in the workshop that starts on July 8th. So 11-week program. The workshop is titled The Yogas of the Bhagavad Gita, Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita. And each session of the workshop, we will examine one theme and we will explore the key ideas presented in the Bhagavad Gita around that theme and how we can practicalize that, how we can use that in our daily life. For example, the first session, the theme will be Dharma. We will see the different facets of Dharma. What are the different definitions of Dharma? The key verses in the Bhagavad Gita around Dharma and how we can live these teachings in our daily life. And the second session, the theme will be Karma, the yoga of action and the law of karma. What is the law of karma? And what are the central teachings from the Bhagavad Gita around the topic of karma and the karma yoga and so forth. There'll be another session on Sankhya. Sankhya, the word Sankhya itself means Samyak Khyayate. Samyak Khyayate Prakashyate Vastu Tattvam Anaya iti Sankhya. Definition of Sankhya is where we are perceiving things as they are clearly without any distortions or obfuscations. We are able to see clearly who am I and who I am not. What gives me happiness and what gives the opposite of what gives misery. So the mind sees clearly the distinction between these opposites. So this is the Sankhya, the teachings of Sankhya. Who am I? What is the nature of the self? We see it clearly. These teachings are presented, of course, in the Sankhya Yoga chapter, 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And also we see the tenets of Sankhya philosophy in other chapters as well, like the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which talks about the 3 gunas. It's also part of the Sankhya teachings, the 3 Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga, the title of the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And this is a very central teaching for yoga practitioners, because the understanding of what is sattva, what is rajas, what is tamas. So when we do various practices such as asanas, even asanas are mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. Shuchau deshe pratishtapya sthiram asanam atmanaha. The 6th chapter, we see the reference to the practice of asanas in the Bhagavad Gita. So when we do asanas, how does it change the sattva, rajas, and tamas, the mix of sattva, rajas, and tamas? What happens to this combination when we do asanas? What happens to the guna mix, the sattva, rajas, tamas, when we do pranayama, etc.? So like that, we will explore all these topics. We also see teachings of Sankhya in the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, the 24 tattvas that I mentioned earlier. The shloka was from the 13th chapter. So like that, we will explore different topics. Another topic that we will explore, one of the themes is tapas. Tapas. What is tapas? Usually we associate the word tapas with intense austerity or intense discipline. So we will examine what is the meaning of tapas. And there are 6 verses around the practice of tapas in the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And we will examine that. What is the tapas of the body? What is the tapas of speech? Vangmaya tapas, tapas of speech. And tapas of the mind, manomaya tapas. So we will examine all these practices And so each session, there will be a theme, and we will explore on the theme, and we will embark on the journey of the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita. So with this, I would like to once again thank everyone for joining today's session, and thank you for your enthusiasm. So allow me to stop here, and over to you, Ankurji.
Wow, great. Always a pleasure. And you can see in the chat, people who have already taken your course are still enthralled by your presentation and recommend it, like Ram Gupta ji from Boston, and I guess Prasad ji, who took your course earlier. I put details of the course, the Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, in the chat. It starts July 8th. It'll go until September 23rd. It's going to be on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Eastern time. We have a few questions. We have a hand up. So let's get to your questions. And this first one is just so basic. You kind of got into it, but everyone always likes this elaborated, especially from somebody like yourself who can get to the heart of it. Srinivas ji, is what are the to-do actions to calm the human mind?
Yes, to calm the mind, in fact, Krishna himself gave the recipe for that, Abhyasa and Vairagya, the practices. And what is Abhyasa? There are definitions around that as well. We see that in the Yoga Sutras. Abhyasa, what are practices? And what is dispassion or Vairagya? That is also, we will explore that as well. So that's a good question, because it is not just Arjuna's predicament where the mind seems unruly and very difficult to control. It is all our questions as well. Because many times when we sit for meditation, we read up in a meditation book that, oh, we will have some profound experiences. Maybe we'll see some blue light, or maybe we will enter into a space of nirvikalpa samadhi. So we have all these expectations in the mind when we sit for meditation. But what we discover is, when we sit in a yoga mat and close our eyes, within 2 minutes, we are not experiencing samadhi, we are experiencing low back pain, or the knee hurts, or there is itching in the face, or scratching here. So we get tormented by the discomforts of the body and the turbulence in the mind. So in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that is why Krishna gives a step-by-step recipe on how to prepare the body for meditation. For example, there's a verse where he says how to position the body for meditation. He says, Samam kaya shirogrivam dharayan achalam stiraha sampreksha nasikagram swam dishashchan avalokayan. Samam kaya shirogrivam means keep the trunk of the body, the neck, and the head aligned with the vertical axis. They're aligned. And this is conducive for the prana to flow along the spinal column. There are 3 very important nadis, Ida, Pingala, and Sushubna, that run along the spinal column. And when we position the body, in fact, one of my teachers, Swami Bodhanandaji, he says, sitting properly is 99% of meditation. So when we allow the body to sit comfortably and stably, sthira and sukham, as Patanjali says, sthiram and sukham, when we position the body correctly, that is most of the meditation. And then we just have to allow the experience of meditation to unfold itself. We cannot force it to happen. It happens on its own. And then we have practices to engage the breath, regulating the breath in pranayama, so that a turbulent mind can be transformed into a tranquil mind. A scattered mind can be transformed into a one-pointed mind. And an agitated mind can be transformed to a mind that is in equilibrium. So these are the three transformations that take place in the mind, 3 transformations. So what are the 3 transformations? One is turbulence to tranquility. Second is a scattered mind to a one-pointed mind. And the third is agitated mind. That is, the mind is in extreme state of mind into a state that is in equilibrium, samatvam. And these 3 transformations, in fact, Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, he explores this in great detail. So we will also cover these topics when we study the Bhagavad Gita as well. And what to do in order to allow these transformations to happen more easily when we sit for meditation.
Wonderful, right? There are a lot of to-do actions, and I love how you elaborated and got into it. Chaitraji is already signed up for the course. Thank you. And then we have Shashiji, who says they've taken the course but might enroll again. That's how good this course is. Let me launch a poll. Just let us know if you are interested in the course. Yes, no, maybe. Indraniji typed out a question, but also has their hand up. I'm going to allow you to talk, Indraniji, so you can ask your question directly if you can unmute yourself. Indrani Day? All right, we'll come back to you if you can figure that out. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to know. Okay, the thing is that since this world is very relative, right? Like different people are having different expectations, right? Like, so how can I attain the supreme bliss? Even if we meditate, do yoga very properly with lot of dedication. I mean, when we open our eyes and when we are again into the world, then the people that we deal in our day-to-day life, their expectations doesn't match with us. So there the conflict arises. Even if I practice the, the sutra of loving everybody, compassion, okay, but that is not accepted by everyone. In that case, what can be the solution?
Yes, that's an excellent question, right? Many times we think of meditation as an escape from the world. For 20 minutes when we sit for meditation, that means we are going to an inner Disneyland. And when we come out of meditation, we are back to the same challenges, etc. But here is the key. When we experience meditation, remember, there is an inner transformation that takes place. Who we are when we come out of meditation is a different person. Of course, from the point of view of Sankhya, the self never undergoes transformation. The self is a constant. What is changing is the mind. The mind undergoes all these parinamas or the transformation. So when we come out of meditation, we see the whole world differently. Previously, we might think of others as, other people may provoke us into anger, or when they hurl an insult, then it might evoke the emotion of anger or even rage, perhaps. But when we practice meditation, what happens is the same experience when they hurl an insult, we evoke compassion instead of anger. Oh, they must be hurt inside. That is why they are so nasty. A person who is happy within will never hurl insults to others. So we see them with a compassionate set of eyes rather than by anger. So this is one of the aspects of being centered. Nothing can provoke such a person. So even if others are trying to provoke you, you'll be like a sage. And whenever the actions are coming from that place of centeredness, remember, yogastha kuru karmani. Whenever we are centered, and then when we allow the actions to come from that place, those actions will be high quality actions. We will always benefit others. In fact, Krishna says in one of the shlokas, Yadyad acharati sreshtaha tattadeveta janaha saya pramanam kurute lokastad anuvartate. That means whenever a person who exemplifies these virtues, when they become a role model, for example, by practicing meditation, when somebody is so centered, they inspire others, and they inspire others who are angry, perhaps to think differently. As Gandhiji says, be the change you wish to see in life. So if you want to change others, we give them, we become a role model, perhaps, with our practice of meditation. Not only are we helping ourselves, but we are encouraging and we are actually inspiring others into the same practice as well. So that way we can change the world.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Indraniji, thank you for your question and participating. Shriramji, always appreciate your elaboration. All right, Indraniji, thank you. We have Swami Topanidiji, who asked a couple questions. I think you're ready to unmute. Go ahead and ask your questions.
Namaste, Hari Om, Sri Ramji. The first question is about a simple understanding about dharma. Is it appropriate action or is it joyful action? Because my understanding is it is not joyful action. It is appropriate action. If a slap is required, it is required, but forget about it. This is one clarification which I need. The second thing is about, rightly you said that Ishwar Pranidhan is mentioned in all the three stages of Samadhi Yoga, Kriya Yoga, as well as Ashtanga Yoga. However, the roots of yoga are from Sankhya, godless philosophy. Yoga also is a godless philosophy. So devotion and bhakti to what and to whom?
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you for those questions. So allow me to begin with the second question first. You are right. In the pure form of Sankhya, so when we read the Sankhya Karika, for example, so people call it the Nirishwara Sankhya. So we don't find mention to the entity called Ishvara. So Ishvara is something that Patanjali brings in order to complement or in order to use for our sadhana. And you are right. In the when we look at the Samadhi Yoga that is presented in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he says, Ishvara Pranidhanat Va. Va means or. In other words, it is an optional practice. If somebody is not ready for bhakti, or if somebody doesn't resonate with the path of bhakti, if the mind is not yet attuned to bhakti, then we can choose another path, Jnana Yoga or Raja Yoga. The word Raja Yoga itself is interesting. Rajra Deeptav, the word Raja usually translated as royal path. But the deeper meaning behind that is Rajra. Rajra means light, yoga of enlightenment, yoga of light. And in Raja Yoga, Ishvara Pranidhana or Bhakti is just one of the ways. And Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that whatever path we take, ultimately they all converge into one. For example, when we progress in the path of Jnana Yoga, it fructifies into Bhakti. There's a verse in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Bahunam Janmanam Ante, Jnanavan Mam Prapaddate, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, Samahatma Sudurlabaha. That means after many lifetimes, a Jnanavan. So when the mind fructifies into that of a Jnani, and Jnani is the greatest Bhakta, he says. He talks about 4 types of Bhaktas. Artho, Jignasu, Rathati, Jnani cha Bharatarshaba. The Jnani becomes a Bhakta. So the Bhakti comes as a consequence. Whatever part we take, ultimately it converges into Bhakti as well. And going back to the first question, you are right. Dharma is a very intricate topic, and it is said that the whole of the Mahabharata is a thorough analysis of dharma, and it is a very intricate topic. So when I mentioned about dharma, so what the intent of that was in my earlier presentation was to be in alignment with the Swadharma within. Shreyan Swadharmo Vigunaha. Paradharmat Swanushthitat is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. So the actions when we do that are in alignment with our Swadharma will bring benefit to us. The other actions, when we try to mimic others' Swadharma, but it doesn't come naturally to us, those type of actions will bring only more fear or anxiety. Paradharmo Bhayavaha. So the point is, Karma yoga can also be defined as the actions that are in alignment with our dharma, with our swadharma. And you are right, there are certain situations in which the actions that come from within may not appear very loving, or it may not appear to come from a place of happiness. We see that even in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is encouraging Arjuna to fight the war. So how can somebody engage in a war happily? But when we go behind and see what is the motivation, what is the thought, or what is the bhavana that motivates this action, it comes from a place of, I want to promote dharma. That is why I am engaging in this war. Otherwise, adharma will flourish. We don't want that to happen. Or to think of another example, when a mother protects her child and the mother is kills maybe a snake because it is trying to harm the child. So the act looks like that of a violence, but yet that action was sponsored from a place of love. It doesn't come from a place of himsa. It comes from a place of love. So ultimately, that sponsoring thought, that sponsoring emotion that powers the engine of action, where does it come from?
Thank you very much, Dr. Sriram. Yes, I understand what you have said very clearly about dharma. You are repeatedly stressing on one point, which is about self-possession while facing the events of life. To be with the self inner being while facing the events of life. And that is what I understand as Ishwar, Pranidhan, and Bhakti. Ishwar is not God. It is possession with the self within. Even a jnani at a stage comes to a point where he is facing the events of life, but he is self-possessed. And that, I think, is bhakti. Because bhakti is misunderstood, according to me. Even in the Bhagavad Gita, they are talking of the attributes of bhakti, 12th chapter, from 13th sloka to the 20th sloka. They're talking of attributes of self-possession. It is not talking of Ishwar as a god. And that is why even yoga is a godless philosophy. I beg to differ with you over here.
Thank you. Thank you for the insights, Swamiji. And you are right. Maybe the translation of the word Ishvara as God, it is not very accurate. When we look at the definition of Ishvara that is given in the Yoga Sutras, Klesha Karma Vipaka Ashaya Aparamrita Purusha Vishesha Ishvaraha. Ishvara is defined in the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. And when we call it God, because the word God is so overloaded, so we bring the baggage that our conceptions about what the word means. So we add on to the definition of Ishvara. But yes, I don't want to open that Pandora's box because that's a big rabbit hole that we will go into. And thanks for also pointing out the last few verses of the 12th chapter, because Bhakti Yoga, for example, you mentioned the 13th verse, right? Adveshta sarva bhutana maitra karuna evacha. Nirmamo nirahankaraha samadukka sukha kshami. The practice of Adveshta sarva bhutanam, not expressing hatred to any being. So that is a practice, that's an abhyasa, and that is part of Bhakti Yoga. So we don't need this entity called God. We can practice Bhakti Yoga by properly engaging with people without hatred, with maitri and karuna, with friendliness, with compassion. Patanjali expands on this. Maitri karuna muditopekshanam sukha dukkha punya punya vishayanam bhavanatas chitta prasadanam, he says. And he talks about these practices as well. So you are right. It's a very fascinating part, and you don't really need another entity. And ultimately, the divinity, the spark of divinity resides within. Ishvara resides within. Again, we see in the 18th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Ishvara sarva bhutanam hriddeshe Arjuna tishtati. Ishvara resides in the heart of all beings, which echoes the shloka that I mentioned earlier, the 15th chapter. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishtaha. Krishna says, I reside in the heart of all beings.
I agree fully with you.
Great.
That is how I understand the word Ishvara, as you rightly pointed out. Because this misconception is going on and on and on. It is bringing yourself to yourself, self-possession, developing and harmonizing your own personality to behave appropriately. That is what you said, Advaita Sarva Bhutanam Mayata Karuna Evacha. There is evolving personality, harmonizing and balancing it. Samatvam Yoga. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Swamiji.
Great, Swamiji. And I love the little back and forth and the engagement. And that's what we do at Hindu University of America. That's what you can do in the course with Dr. Sriram Sarvatam. Please do consider enrolling in the course. If you haven't filled out the survey, please do. We have 28 people out of the 50 or so that said, yes, definitely they want to enroll in the course. So that is really wonderful to see. The recording of this webinar, of previous webinars, will be made accessible. Tim, thank you for asking that. There's a few more questions. We're kind of at the top, we're past the top of the hour. We'll send out an email that has the details of the recording, of the course details, of other maybe questions that we took in. Shriramji, how much more do we want to get into some of these other questions? How about Shashiji, because he's already taken a course. He's asking, what's the difference between meditation as taught by Bhagavan Krishna and described by Buddha?
Oh, I'm not an expert. I've not studied about the teachings of Buddha. So I don't think I'll be qualified to answer that question.
Okay, so we'll table that one and maybe we'll bring that up in a future webinar. Interesting question. Srinivasji is asking about pradakshinas, right? Like his simple question is, how many is correct? But obviously it's more complicated than how many is correct. Why do we do ringing the bell, taking arti, breaking the coconut, putting the tilak? And what is the application, or how does that layer into the deeper practice? If you want to take that one, maybe that'll be one of our last questions before I give you a chance to close this out.
So my perspective on that is, whatever actions that are inspired from a place of bhakti. We saw the definition of the word puja, purnat jayate iti puja. So when the heart is filled with bhakti, whatever inspired action that comes, offering of a flower or offering of a fruit or offering of water. Krishna himself says that in the Bhagavad Gita, patram pushpam phalam toyam yome bhaktya prayachati. So with bhakti, even a simple action as offering a flower or offering a fruit or offering water, so that elevates the action into that of a spiritual action. It is not just a mundane action. It is not just a mechanical action, but it is a profound action. So it is the bhakti, what is the inner state that produces that action, that is more important than the action that we do. So all these actions that come from a place of bhakti, all the puja that we do, so the number of pradakshinas, etc., those are all details perhaps, but more important than that is the inner state of mind with which we offer these actions.
Great. I dropped the details of the course one more time in the chat. It's going to be a $300 course. I'll put my email if you have any questions. We have a scholarship for people outside of the United States, in particular areas like Bharat, the Caribbean, places where the income may not be the same. So you can look into that, send me an email. It's going to start July 8th. It's going to go until September 23rd. And it's going to be on Zoom like this. So wherever you are, you can participate. It won't be a webinar. It'll be like a meeting where you can interact with other classmates, with Shriramji. It'll be on our HUA's learning management system week by week. The links and the readings and the details will be easily accessible. We try to make it easy to participate in this learning program at Hindu University of America. And the course is also part of our certificate program in Hindu studies, right? Become a Hindu with clarity and confidence, who can have that strong foundation from all these different perspectives. I love how you go back and forth with the Sanskrit and translate and inform, and it's just so wonderful. Shriramji, truly appreciate you. Thank you everyone for joining us. With that, Shriramji, I'll give you the last word, maybe if you want to close us on a shloka or however you feel, but I can't encourage you enough to take this course with Dr. Shriram Sarvatam starting on July 8th. Please do sign up. He is definitely one of the stars at Hindu University of America. Thank you all. Shriramji, to you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and thank you so much, Ankurji. I just want to state that so I've been offering these courses for several quarters, as Ankurji mentioned before, and I have personally gained a lot. I am also learning through all this. I don't think of myself as an expert. I just think of myself as a co-student. We are all learning together, exploring the subject of yoga. And it has profoundly helped me in my own personal studies. In yoga, this is called the Swadhyaya, self-inspired study of yoga. So one thing I can guarantee that it's joyful. It's a very fun experience to explore these topics. For example, yesterday we had the session. We're right now in the middle of the Yoga Sutras course. And although the session timings was just 90 minutes, but the session went up to 3 hours yesterday. And all the participants were still there. Enthusiastic participation, discussions, back and forth, and so forth. So we all had a very beautiful, engaging experience, very fun experience of study. So I really look forward to that, again, in the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita course. So perhaps let me conclude with once again chanting the last shloka of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Eka Shloki, the one shloka that captures the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, which was in the words of Sanjaya. Sanjaya uvacha yatra yogeshwara krishnaha yatra partho dhanurdharaha tatra shrir vijayo bhutihi dhruvani tirmatirmama. Dhanyavadaha. Namaste.